Welcome back to the Beat Break Morning Show and the Beat Break Podcast. You're rocking with the best. I go by the name of Sean Garvey at Sean Garvey ATL on Twitter and on Instagram at Beat Break Radio, Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. I got a very, very special guest joining with me this morning, this evening, whatever time zone you're listening to the Beat Break Morning Show. And don't forget, please, ladies and gentlemen, to download the Podcast FM app to your mobile device so you can hear the Beat Break Morning Show and many other programs. He got a new podcast that's getting ready to come out, and it's going to be called TheGrio Daily with Michael Harriot. Michael Harriot on the Beat Break Morning Show, ladies and gentlemen. We got the one and only Michael Harriot. I want to make sure I said your last name right. Is it Harriot?
Yeah, you said it exactly right. Like most people usually want to add a little bit or spice it up, but you said it exactly right. Harriot, like chariot.
Okay, got it. All right. Well, Michael Harriot is on the Beat Break Morning Show with us this morning from TheGrio, new podcast, getting ready to launch TheGrio Daily with Michael Harriot. Good to see you. How is life? How is life treating you?
Man, everything is good, man. I can't complain about anything, white people, and black people are still black people, and I'm just living.
And we still having these conversations. We still having these kind of conversations, a lot of pressing conversations. And I know it's going to be a lot of thought-provoking conversations that you are going to have with TheGrio Daily. But for our listeners out there, for our viewers out there, give our listeners and viewers some context on your backstory.
Yeah, so I am a writer. I've written for like literally everyone. I currently write. I'm a columnist for TheGrio, for The Guardian. I am a staff writer on the Amber Ruffin Show, and this podcast will be about. I am kind of known for talking, contextualizing the current with history, with economics. I'm an economist by trade who kind of talks a lot about race as an economic construct. And so that's what we'll be doing on the podcast, man. That's what we'll be, we won't be talking necessarily about the news. Think of it as like somebody coming into our village every morning and telling you not what's going on in the world, but this is what you need to be thinking about when somebody comes and tell you, or when you hear about what's going on in the world, right? Like this is how you contextualize it. Don't let them fool you. Don't just absorb and regurgitate what you hear on the news. Here is the context for that.
Yes. We live in a news cycle world, 24/7. People consume news from different avenues these days. Facebook, even Instagram, all these social media sites. And as a news journalist, personality like myself, I want to make sure that the news and the stories that I'm getting, it has to come from reliable sources first before I could really take it as accurate information when it hits social media. And when I see it on social media first, I got to fact check it. That's what we have to do, of course, in the world of journalism and broadcasting. We got to fact check the information and then go from there. And so when it comes to podcasts, everybody nowadays, and I keep saying this 1,000 times, even a dog got a podcast, even a cat got a podcast. Why do you think you wanted to go into the route of doing a podcast? You could have, of course, still keep it the same content, the same premise, and do it in a different kind of avenue. But why in a podcast medium?
Well, first thing is, I agree with what you're saying. It's funny that you asked that question because, as a journalist, when I started, like long after I started doing this, and as a professor, when podcasts first started, I thought it was going to be great for Black people. And so I started a podcast in 2012. I always say it was before Black people started listening to podcasts. So I started my podcast 10 years ago, and a podcast called The Black One. And the catchphrase was, when they ask you which podcast you listen to, tell them you listen to The Black One, because there were no other Black podcasts, right? So um, I did like 250 episodes, and like black people still weren't listening to podcasts. So podcast is really a relatively new thing, in our community, although it has existed. Like I would have to explain when I started what a podcast was. It's kind of like a radio show, but then you can listen whenever you want to. You don't have to work. And so now that we kind of are in the podcast ecosphere, it's easier for me. But I think it's a way to talk directly to people without having your views and your commentary, tailored by a news network or someone who wants to abridge what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. You didn't have this type of medium 50 years ago, not even 40 years ago. And it's great to even have this type of medium, especially with all the current events and the things that are happening, not just only on a national level, but on a global level, and give people like yourself and like myself an opportunity to keep people informed and at the same time entertain as well. Michael Harriot from the Grio Daily, coming in a couple of days, and we have him on the Beat Break Morning Show to talk about the podcast. You have a term, and I don't want to butcher this new term. This new term is new to me, and it starts with the letter W. And from my understanding, this particular term is something that you are going to touch on your new podcast. You got to educate me, Michael, on this new term. We're apologists, or
Yeah. So it's a term like it's actually in the dictionary now.
right.
I started using it a few years ago, and it's one of the terms I'm like credited with coining. It's white peopleologist.
White
It's
apologists.
we always talk about. Um, you see white professors, man, who study Black history and Africana studies, but I started it as a joke, like I am an expert on white people, but
Mhm.
it's not really a joke in that, so I was born and raised and homeschooled in basically an all black environment. So when I was pushed out in the world, I had to be intentional about learning about white people because I hadn't absorbed a lot of the default things that a lot of people unknowingly and subconsciously, defer to whiteness. And so I had to be intentional about learning about white people. So now I call myself a white peopleologist, but it's also based on the premise that I believe you can't understand race, you can't understand white supremacy, you can't understand America and the struggle and the disparities that exist in this country by examining black people. Black people didn't create racism. We don't perpetuate white supremacy. It's not around because of us. The only way that you can really understand it is to study and examine white people, thus white peopleology.
Mm. Mm. So when we have these conversations about racism in America, even white privilege, and the difference between white culture and black culture, we have these conversations, right? What is the end game? What is the end game for these type of conversations? Or as a podcaster and a writer like yourself, what would you like to see come out of having these type of topics as it pertains to racism and the way white people can be perceived?
Well, I don't think there necessarily has to be an end game in knowledge or understanding, right?
Mm.
Like you know, when you took trigonometry in the 11th grade, or algebra 3, or chemistry in the 10th grade or the 11th grade, it wasn't with the end game of you becoming a chemist or you becoming a mathematician or you becoming there is certain knowledge necessary to contextualize the world, right? Like you don't have to have an end game, but when you don't have to also walk down the street and wonder, hey, how did the flowers grow when it rained and the sun shined every day? Because you studied biology, you know how the flowers grow, right? Because you studied algebra, you know how to figure out a complex math problem or one that's not so complex. You know how to calculate the angle of a triangle when you trying to build a wall at your house. So there doesn't necessarily have to be a particular end game, but we know that this American education system and the news, the way the news is structured to rid us or to keep certain bits of information from us, right? And so the more education, the more information, the more knowledge that we have is a good thing. It doesn't necessarily have to have a specific purpose of you're going to take this thing that I gave you and do this with it, but you have it in your arsenal when you need it.
Mm, mm. This is going to be a heavy podcast as it pertains to just having what I consider as uncomfortable conversations. Sometimes uncomfortable conversations can be healthy. It can unpack and unpeel those layers and have those conversations surrounding race and things that we don't normally hear in mainstream media, or we don't get the opportunity or have the space to really talk about it. We see racism pretty much every other day, subtle racism. And, the stories that we come across and things that have happened over the past couple of years, even with the riot, the insurrection at the Capitol last year, to just the current stuff that's happening right now. It's just so many layers to peel from these type of instances to actually unpack in a podcast. And people are so engaged. They're so engaged when it comes to these type of conversations, especially our white counterparts. So it can be a very engaging but yet a teachable conversation.
Yeah, man. And then the thing about this podcast is that, you don't have to drop one of your podcasts to add this podcast, right? So this podcast is only at the maximum 15 minutes every day, right? So you can listen to it on your way to work and still listen to the podcast you listen to and still listen to the radio shows that you listen to. We've already done episodes, for instance, like on 4th of July, our 4th of July episode was like a response on, we know that the Willie Lynch letter is fake, right? But we also created a response because the Willie Lynch letter supposedly was about how to make a slave. And what it did is basically retroactively retrofit the conversation about what's wrong with black people. Well, our episode was basically how they created white people. And it went into the history of how white people were actually invented, and not the mythology, right? But when we started using the term race, when we started using this European ethic that combined like Greek people and Italian people and French people and German people and said they were all the same thing. And so those are the kind of conversations we'll be having. We'll be having them in 15 minutes. And contrary to what you said, like, I don't believe many of these topics are uncomfortable or controversial because, like, black people have these conversations all the time. When we say, a certain topic is talking about race is controversial, we talk about race all the time. It's white people who don't want to talk about race, and we don't let them dictate the term. We can't let them dictate the terms of the conversation. So if everybody is cool with this conversation except white people, then it's not an uncomfortable conversation. It is a comfortable conversation for everybody except a specific group of people. And because that group of people has historically dictated the terms on which we have all conversations, we call it uncomfortable. And it ain't. Like, you and I have been sitting here for 15, 20 minutes having a conversation about race, and neither one of us are uncomfortable. Why do we call it an uncomfortable conversation?
It's uncomfortable to those that never had the conversation or never participated in a conversation of that magnitude. Like people outside of me and you, or people who are used to having conversations about politics and other things that may not include racism, if or when they are introduced and brought into a conversation on racism, I can see it being uncomfortable to them for the first time because they are engaging into something that they may not have too much knowledge about. They may not have had the same kind of experiences that you had. That could be uncomfortable to where the more and more we have these conversations, it could go from being uncomfortable to them for the first time to now it can be comfortable to them if they are willing to be more engaged and willing to be more educated and get some understanding out of these conversations that we have.
Yeah, I think so. But if you listen to what you just said, right? Like you're talking about white people, and like the idea that they dictate the conversation so much. Like there ain't no white people in this room, and yet like you didn't say white people because you know inherently the resistance that will come when you say white people. But ain't no black people in this world who don't have a conversation about race. Ain't no black people in the world who aren't comfortable or haven't been in rooms tens and 20 and hundreds of times in rooms that talk about race. So what you're talking about is white people, and the resistance to saying that is because they have dictated the terms on which we have conversations. And that's what this podcast is about, man. It's like ain't nobody gonna dictate the terms but us. And that's why we can have this conversation. And white people want to listen, they can listen. But it's not on their terms, and they'll have to, whoever listens will have to understand that these conversations are centered in blackness, centered in us, and centered in our culture. And on the ancillary is the world that is around us. So we are looking at the world. We're not having the world look at us. And that's what this podcast is about.
I agree. I mean, I agree with you 100%. What I'm saying is like, put yourself in a room full of white people. Not you're the only black person in the room with white people, because I've been around white people, right? And they talk about ice cream. Like they could have a 35 to 45-minute discussion about about ice cream. Oh, I had butterscotch pecan and it was the best. It tasted so better than the other ice cream I had the other day. Or they may talk about how sweet their foot smells for an entire 45 minutes or whatever. And then I come in and say, hey, dear white people, or hey, all my Caucasian friends, let's talk about racism today. Imagine the look on their faces if I come into the room and say, hey, we're going to talk about racism today. They were like, okay. We're not going to talk about ice cream today. We're not going to talk about smelly feet today. We're going to talk about racism.
Yeah. So here's the question, though, right? And I'm genuinely interested in knowing this. I don't know the answer. Do you think they're uncomfortable because you're in the room while they're asked while that happens, or do you think they're uncomfortable because they don't talk about race? Like, do you think white people talk about race except not around us because it would make us uncomfortable, or do you think they just don't have the conversation about race?
I honestly think it's all of the above. I think on one hand, they have those conversations behind closed doors. They may not go in depth because we're not around them, or, we're not in the same space as them when they are doing it behind closed doors. And on the other hand, because like you said earlier, to piggyback on what you said earlier, they don't know what we've been through. They don't know our experience. They can't relate to what we've been through and stuff like that. So I think it's a combination of both.
So let me ask you this then, because I was just thinking about that when you were talking. If they don't have in-depth conversations about race, how is it possible that the same racist tropes and the same racist ideas have existed throughout generations, over centuries, by all the white people across the country? Like, they must have a conversation about race now that when you think about an in-depth conversation to perpetuate those same ideas, like what white people believed in the. So this is kind of like a kind of conversation we would be having on the podcast, right? So there's this poll there's this poll called the NORC, right? It's the National Opinion Research Council, and they've been doing a poll since so for 80 years, since the 1940s. On they just ask the same questions, and the value of this poll is that you can look at what white people believed in the 1940s and compare it to what people believed in the 50s, what people believed in the 60s. And so the questions change, but then they have a standard baseline of questions that they ask every year. So I bring that up because in the 1940s, like 35% of white people believed that black people were inherently less intelligent than white people. And the same thing in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and even today, the same amount of white people believe that black people are less intelligent as they did 80 years ago. The same amount of white people believe that black people don't achieve as much because we're inherently lazy now as they did 80 years ago, right? So we can compare these things, right? And so would that be possible if they didn't have an in-depth conversation about race, even if it was wrong, even if it was BS, even if it was lies? There must be a white conversation about race that they're comfortable talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But you know what I think too, where not think I know. You know what I know that today, white people are, from my own eyes, starting to be more engaged in our conversations, or seeing an abundance of our white counterparts having these kind of conversations, is because of social media. And I say
Yeah,
that
yeah,
because
I think
I say that because we see images. When I say we, now I'm talking about in general, all of us, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic. We see images, we see videos of mistreatment of Black people more than ever before because of social media, because of camera phones. You didn't just only see back in the day, all you saw was Rodney King. And then you may have saw another videotape of another Black man getting beat down or shot and killed, and you didn't see those images and videos on a daily. But now that you have social media, you have YouTube and all these other platforms and avenues and stuff, and you seeing that more and more than ever before, especially our white counterparts and Caucasian people. You know, that derives too from social media. Social media plays a big part in those conversations as well.
right, but do you think that leads to anything? Because I would argue that, well, the conversations, first of all, I don't know if the social media, like we see the conversations more, but I don't know if social media has led to more conversations. Like there was a whole civil rights movement where the culture and the temperature of America was all about race, and we were having these conversations. Like I think our generation we tend to see social media as something that has made the world see something different, when you got to think about it, man. Like white people in 1950 saw a lot of lynching. They knew, like, the way that black people knew their place in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s was because an early version of social media, which is white conversations, which is radio, which is newspaper, kept us in our place with the threat of that kind of violence. They saw that kind of violence. Like I live in a town where Sam Hose, a man in the 1890, was lynched, and there's so many white people came out when they caught him that they had to turn every train in Georgia in toward the site of his lynching to accommodate the crowds. There was more crowds than any current day football player, and then they set him on fire, burnt him, and sold his body parts for souvenirs. Social media has not made us see racism any more vividly than it was when they lynched Sam Hose. It is just our perspective
but
that it is different and that white people see it.
But you know what the difference though is between today and back then? Back then, a black person couldn't stand in front of white people and post opinions about what was happening to their brothers and sisters being lynched. Whereas fast forward to now to social media, and you see opinions, you see narratives, you see in people in real time saying this is wrong, this is terrible, this has got to stop. When you see all of that in comments in 150 characters or more and stuff like that, it just creates more and more engagement. It creates more and more conversations. Like I see these conversations and I see these engagements all the time on social media. Every time a video is posted, every time an image is posted, you couldn't do that. A black person couldn't do that. You know,
Yeah, but they were,
when
man. Like we weren't just shutting up. Like Ida B. Wells existed, and Malcolm X existed, and W.E.B.
right.
Du Bois existed, and there were thousands of nameless, faceless people who were saying the same things. We were doing that. It's like the
Right.
black people then weren't shutting up. And then the danger that existed then, like the black people might be put in jail or might be ostracized for speaking out, that still exists now too. So it's not different. It is like we want to take
Well, I'm saying
out of
I'm saying
context
in front of
our
our white. I'm saying in front of our white counterparts. I mean, Malcolm X. You know, his core, of course, his core audience were African Americans, and yeah, he did go to a few schools here and there that was white and talk to
no, no,
the
no.
white.
Most like that's like most of where Michael X was speaking was in front of white people. You can forget like Frederick Douglass was at the National White Women's Auxiliary Organization when he gave that speech. What to the slave is the 4th of July. Like we have been having these conversations, and like there's a whole Ida B. Wells versus Francis Willard beef in the 1890s over lynching with like Ida B. Wells saying white women don't care. Francis Willard said, well, black people do drink a lot though. Like this thing exists. We like there's this idea called presentism where we think the thing that is happening today has never happened before, when like it is a continuum. It's not any different. Like like when you look at and when you research polls and ideas and writings, you'll see that the conceits of people, white people haven't changed, black people's opinions haven't changed. We're not even more, like that's why I hated that thing. Don't think I'm like my ancestors. Like we're not more militant than black people aren't more militant than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. White people aren't more embracive or inclusive than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. If you study and if you know information, you will be able to contextualize what is going on in the world, and you will see that it ain't really no change in the conceits and the ideology that we live under. The reality is that the tactics look different, but they have the same goal.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, the tactics. I mean, the tactics and the strategy about how we're going about doing it is totally different than how it was back then. You know, back then, we didn't have like what we are doing right now. We didn't have, or our ancestors back then didn't have a Zoom. They didn't have a Spotify or all these platforms to where we can get on these platforms and have these important discussions and these important conversations to talk about race. Like it was limited back then, but now we got all these different platforms. We got all these different avenues. We got all the opportunities to bring people, whether they agree with my assessment or your assessment, or whether they disagree with my assessment or your assessment. We now have the tools, we now have the tactics, we now have the strategies to take what we're using, take what we're saying, and actually bring forth change. Do you see that, do you see some things that are different though compared to the civil rights era and the previous eras that came before the civil rights era when it comes to change, when it comes to the plight of Black America and what our new generation is doing?
Yeah, I think there are subtle changes, and I don't want to make it look like black people ain't made no progress. There are changes, right? Like, the train moves forward. I think there are two things that simultaneously exist. I think there is the progress that we think we've made versus the progress that we've made. Like black people like we see a lot of rich black people on TV now, but on the whole, black wealth is when you compare black wealth to white wealth, it's got the disparity has gotten even bigger over the years, and those are the kinds of things like even this conversation that we have, and like a lot of people, especially outside of our community, would listen to this and say, "Hey, them dudes arguing," not knowing that's how we talk to each other, right? That's how we explore ideas, right? And it might be something that you convince me on, and then there might be something that I convince you about, right? But I think overall, black people in this country have understood, like we have learned from. I mean, you got to think about it, man. Like we just this struggle that we're in isn't on in the grand scheme of things really that old, right? Like, I mean, 400 years is a long time, but in the continuum of the space and time and the existence of the earth, man, like they haven't really kept us here that long, right? And
Mhm.
freedom is inevitable, right? Equality is inevitable. And what we have to realize is that, what has changed for black people for the good is just a small blip on our long arc, and what we have been subjected to in America cannot compare to what we have contributed to the history of this universe.
I got to go back to something you said earlier. Now, you said that this type of content is going to be 15 minutes long. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah,
Or at least 15 minutes? How are you going to jam all this
yeah,
in into 15 minutes?
yeah. But
Because
see, we
this
just talked
is
about
good.
like 10 different things, right? Yeah, we just
Yeah.
talked about 10 different things, right? But see, it's each day is going to be one thing, right? So, like for instance, right? Like if I instead of talking about like these January 6 hearings, right? I'll do 15 minutes on here's what you need to know about these January 6 hearings. And then I'll go into the history of voter suppression and how since we've been here, there's been this violent movement to keep black people from voting. And then in 2020, what happened is that because of COVID, white access to the polls was kind of fairly equal to black access to the poll. And what happened was that it was so unbelievable that black people actually wanted to vote to white people. They thought, hey man, somebody must have rigged this, right? So I can do all of that in 15 minutes, right? And say, that's what you need to understand about January 6th. Now you can see what the Trump said and what this person in his office said. Like you can watch MSNBC to do that. But the reason these people find it so unbelievable that this thing happened is because of the long history of voter suppression. And let's think about that instead of these various white people who keep parading in front of Congress with their exposés and stories about what they saw.
Okay. Michael Harriot, TheGrio Daily, coming June 20th. June 20th. That's the date the podcast episode 1 is coming out. June 20th?
Yeah, that's when we debuted. Yeah, we
Maybe.
debuted
Okay.
on June 20th. And you can find us on YouTube, on any podcast app, and I invite you to download the Grio streaming app, man. Like everybody who downloads it is amazed that there's this black streaming app that nobody talks about that owns like over 50 channels in majority black cities that are broadcast quality channels that you can watch live, that you can watch black movies, that you can see podcasts. It is an incredible thing. And, it's kind of done undercover and only we know about it. So download the app, even if you don't want to listen to TheGrio Daily or watch TheGrio Daily, just to see what the streaming network has brought forth.
I got a few more minutes with you. We're not letting you go that easy, Michael Harriot, on the Beat Break Morning Show. TheGrio, speaking of which, great segue. The Griot. Talk to our listening audience about the Griot. The Griot's been around for a minute now, and I subscribe to the Griot. I think the Griot is a great platform with so amazing, talented people, writers, journalists, people that have voices, and like yourself. So, can you give our audience a little bit history, a little background context to the Griot, what it is, and what it stands for?
So the Griot is a platform. It started out as a news platform, but it's evolved into all kinds of media now. I was just talking about the Griot app. It's owned by Byron Allen, who is the largest Black owner of broadcast television stations in the world.
We gotta give a hand clap.
In every majority Blacks. Yeah. In every majority Black city. Yeah, and he owns pretty much a station in every majority Black city in this country. And like, I don't want to say how many, because like every other day, there's news like, oh, he bought another TV station. But and on the Griot app, you can watch what these TV stations have live. Like, you can watch the local news in Birmingham, or what's going on at a community on a daily show, on a morning show in Detroit, through this app. And so the Griot is about amplifying Black voices, and it's also about bringing you news from us, right? So there's actually a great episode of this podcast, of the TheGrio Daily podcast, that explains the history of the term Griot and how it relates to us today. Because basically, who do you want giving you your news? People who understand it, or because or people who have traditionally and historically oppressed us, right? And that's why it's important. The Griot is the only Black-owned organization that has a person in the White House press corps, April Ryan, right? So it's not like we are blogging about stuff that we see from afar. We have journalists on the ground in spaces covering us and telling our stories. And that's what we've been doing for years now. And that's what we're going to continue doing. So that's what this platform is about. That's what the TheGrio Daily is about. And we hope you're going to listen, at least, if not to me. We also have, podcasts about Black culture, a quiz show, politics. April Ryan does politics. We have Toure there, Panama Jackson, Christina Greer, who is a professor at Fordham, politics professor at Fordham. Like, we have a collection of bright minds who are coming together to tell our stories.
I love it. Now, it's 2022, a year that more and more podcasters are still coming out. Like I said earlier in our conversation, during our introduction, and even after our introduction, I was saying that every day, every other day, people are coming out with podcasts about something that is very newsworthy, something that captures people's attention, right? And in the year 2022, which is almost about to be the end of 2022. Can you believe, Michael, that all these things have happened in 2022 since the beginning of 2022? I'm talking about things like the aftermath of COVID-19, in which they call it an endemic, from gas prices being high to the inflation, high prices in food, baby formula shortages. I can go on and on and on, right? Like, even comedians under attack when things go wrong, and I can keep going on and on and on. So, are you going to unpack those things in your show as well?
Yeah, we unpack things that are going on in 2022 by understanding, what is going on in the world and what is going on in our culture. And like, I agree with you, man. Like, I really can't tell you the difference between 2019 and 2022. It's like after COVID came out, it's all just one blur. It's like everything just happened together. like you could tell me something that happened 3 years ago happened last month, and I'd be like, yeah, I guess that seems right. So it's all one big blur to me. But yeah, we're gonna be unpacking current events. We talk about guns, we talk about mass shootings, we talk about all of these things, man. But we talk about it in a way that isn't salacious. Isn't We don't want to make it a hot button issue. We don't want to, have hot takes, right? What we want to have is the correct take, the interesting take, the insightful take instead of the hot take. And so that's what we're trying to do, man. Like I am a person who goes down rabbit holes. And so I want this show to be like a rabbit hole for each conversation that we have or each topic that we choose.
Right. Yeah. Even more reasons to tune in to the GRIO Daily with Michael Harriot, because it's just so much happening that has happened in the world. And you can't forget too Roe versus Wade, Roe versus Wade being overturned, and just so much things happening. I got to ask you, what have you done thus far to prepare you for the GRIO Daily? Are you like a one-man team, or do you have people that you work alongside with to put this whole podcast together, or to uh, get each episode out there to the masses?
Yeah, there's a whole production team, man. I have producers, there are editors, sound design. So there's a whole team from Regina Griffin, the manager editor of podcasts. We have editors. So this is a whole group. It's a group project, and I'm just the one in front of the camera, in front of the mic. And so that's why it's not like the Michael Harriot Daily or this dude Daily. It's the GRIO Daily because it's a team effort.
It's a team. Do you know how hard it is to do everything by yourself when it comes to doing a podcast? Just like the one that I'm
Bruh.
doing right now with you. I mean, I had to do my own light design. I got to do my own editing. I got to set everything up. I had to set everything up myself before doing the podcast. I'm with you on the team aspect.
Yeah, man, that's how I started out doing everything by myself. And that was 10 years ago when, I would just be around, as I was recording people and having conversations in interesting places. So, in Baltimore during the Freddie Gray uprising, or in Ferguson, I would do podcasts from there, but nobody was listening to podcasts then. So yeah, it's nice to have a team and to have the support that I have now.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no I in team, right? Michael Harriot from the GRIO Daily with Michael Harriot, premiering Monday, January, or actually June. I don't want to say January. I'm thinking January, maybe because that's my birthday month. June 20th, Monday, June 20th on the GRIO. So I want to ask you, now you got the podcast, the GRIO podcast, 15 minutes, uncut commentary from you, Michael Harriot. I know there's going to be some guests that you're going to bring on your podcast. Will there be guests on your podcast maybe sometime in the near future or so?
Yeah, we'll probably have guests, but it's mostly just like me talking about things. Like it's not really guest driven; it is idea driven. So, but it really doesn't have a format. We've had guests on, like when Roe versus Wade was overturned. We had Christina Greer on to come and talk about that. So, think of it as there is no format. Like you don't know what we're going to do from episode to episode because we are not going to adhere to a structure. We're going to adhere to the best way to get this idea to people.
I love it. I love it, man. Now, if you had to get one guess in one of your future shows for the GRIO Daily, if you had to go out and get one guest, that one dream guest, that you have to bring on your show, you have to bring on your podcast and be like, you know what, you are the person that I've been wanting to interview for years? Who would that be?
If I had, so I know that there's somebody out here who like has heard and been around Donald Trump when he used the N word and went on a real racist rant. That's the person I want to have on, like just to talk to him and see what they did when he went on his little racist rant. Because it's somebody like Donald Trump is like almost like 300 years old. Ain't no way he didn't use the N word around somebody. And I just want to talk to that person and see what it was like.
His hair is 300 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. Who?
Yeah,
I
man.
mean, Donald Trump on your podcast. What about that? TheGrio Daily with Michael Harriot. Donald Trump on your podcast. What would that look like?
I don't know. We probably get into a fist fight. Yeah, I don't know if I would put Donald Trump on because, like, he has enough platforms to spew his racist bile without me helping him or me playing his sidekick. So I don't know if that would happen. Smartest people in the world, I think.
You couldn't handle that type of thing while he was president, while he was in office, but after, I don't know. That's the thing. The person that also comes to my mind is Barack Obama.
Yeah, I've interviewed Barack Obama before.
Oh, you have? Okay.
I've interviewed him. Yeah. Like, so someone like Barack Obama, see, this is what a lot of people like in journalists who are not in journalism don't know. Like, when you talk about people like Barack Obama, even Donald Trump and people like that, see, those people are used to, like, have been so trained in how to evade answers that you really aren't going to get anything in a real interview with them. Like it's not the interviewer who will get something out of him. So, like, there's nothing I'm going to say to Barack Obama that you couldn't read in a book or he hadn't told somebody else, because, like, he's not gonna be candid. Like, it might be something cool or funny that he'll say, but nothing interesting that, like, it's not that I don't like Barack Obama. It's just that, like, I mean, what are we gonna learn, really? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's gonna be, I mean, honestly, like, ain't no difference in talking to Barack Obama than talking to Cardi B. It's a celebrity interview at this point, right? Not because he has the same ethos as Cardi B, but because Barack Obama is so skilled at talking to people and talking to media that we're not going to uncover anything new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I'm having a conversation with Barack Obama, one of the things I would ask him is, how in the hell did your hair go from being all black to all gray? Because it just went from 0 to 100 real quick.
I'll tell you this. And this is so I'll tell you like this. This is how it happens. The presidency is a hard job, and those hairs and age start coming in on you, and it just happens, man. I woke up one day and I was gray, looked like I had been in a Friday the 13th movie, or my grandma. I thought I was looking at my grandmother. And so, yeah, like, you ain't.
I really do believe. You know what? I really do believe that those answers that Barack Obama would give me on a podcast. I really do think so.
Yeah.
The TheGrio Daily with Michael Harriot. Okay. On the TheGrio Black Podcast Network, the TheGrio Black Podcast Network. That's what you're gonna be on. And so, for those that want to tune in to listen to your content, to listen to your podcast, tell them how they can go about accessing your content.
Yeah. So the TheGrio app is the best way, again, even if you're not going to listen to the podcast. And then it's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, I don't know, your grandmama radio that's in the basement. Like everywhere, it's everywhere you listen to podcasts. Anywhere you want to listen to podcasts, just search for the TheGrio Daily. You'll find it probably, unless you're searching on like a dictionary on your bookshelf. Then you probably have a little hard time. But we're everywhere, man.
All right, cultural commentary, even things on entertainment, news, other cultures, and just against the grain content. I like it. I like it, man. So what else you got going on besides the podcast? What else do you have going on, or what are you going to be working on in the near future?
Well, we're currently on hiatus on the Amber Ruffin show. So still writing for that, still writing for The Guardian. And in January, the book, Black AF.
Oh, Michael, you still there? Michael. Okay, we'll bring him back. Michael Harriot, the TheGrio Daily with Michael Harriot on the TheGrio Black Podcast Network by way of the TheGrio. You guys check it out. It's going to be a very in-depth, content-based conversation on all things considered: entertainment, news, culture, content, current events, you name it. Michael Harriot, ladies and gentlemen, right here on the Beat Break Morning Show with Sean Garvey. And while we try to bring him back on, I got to let you all know once again to download the Podcast FM app to your mobile device so you can listen to the Beat Break Morning Show at your disposal. That's Podcast FM. Download it now. We're also on beatbreakradiofm.com. That's beatbreakradiofm.com. You can listen to our website 24/7. Big shout outs to all of our affiliate stations carrying the Beat Break Morning Show, including Beat Break 87 FM, Reach One Network, as well as 101 The Vibe FM in Louisville, Kentucky, Thinking Out Loud Network, and the Flow Television Network. You can access our content as well on all those platforms. Make sure you follow me at Sean Garvey ATL on Twitter and on Instagram, Facebook at Sean Garvey, and at Beat Break Radio on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram, everywhere. I think we lost Michael Harriot. I think we lost him. Oh, man. Oh, we was almost done. We was almost done with the conversation, with the interview, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if we can try to bring him back on before we get ready to close out this part of the show. So we're going to take a brief break from the radio, and we will be right back with more of the Beat Break Morning Show. Big shout outs to DJ Rollum and Star Kells, as well as Mr. Moody. All of them on vacation, especially Star Kells, who is still in Africa, and DJ Rollum is on his marital hiatus. He will be jumping in and out every now and then on the morning show. So yeah, the Beat Break Morning Show. Y'all keep it locked. We will be right back.